Welcome back to the program. My guest is with me right now. Dr. Andrew Nevin is the Chief Economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Good morning, Doctor, and thank you for joining us on today's edition of the program.
Good morning, Nancy. It's always great to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always good to have you too. Let's get started. I haven't spoken with you in a while. Yes, in a while. I think we last spoke, yes, in a few months. Yeah. Perhaps last year.
Maybe. Yeah. I can't remember if it was before or after the election.
Yes, I think before the election. So let me get your view. So far since we last spoke, a whole lot has happened. From elections, of course, now transition, we have a new president. What do you think? How are people that you've been speaking with, you're the chief economist at PwC, what has been the sentiment so far of perhaps international investors between that time and now?
Yeah, no, I think it's been very, very positive. I mean, obviously the two big distortions that we could start with, the foil subsidy and the FX regime. On the FX regime, I mean, we've said very clearly, I think we wrote a paper in 2017. We didn't take it out publicly, but we simply said, if we have multiple exchange rates, what's going to happen is there won't be enough investment in the country and we'll grow slowly. And of course, what we said is what precisely happened. I mean, during the whole Buhari regime, we averaged about 1.5% GDP growth in official numbers, and the population's growing about 2.7 or 2.8%, so we got poorer and poorer. So a necessary condition to have an economic turnaround is a unification of the exchange rate. So I think it was very courageous. I mean, of course, the CBN had talked for years that we were going to unify the exchange rate, but under the previous administration, there wasn't really much progress, and the gap between the parallel rate and the official rates widened. But His Excellency President Tinubu has just come in and said, no, this is a necessary condition to move forward, and he's make that bold step. So the community, the international community, I can tell you, within a day, people were starting to inquire about investing. People want to invest, but as long as there were multiple exchange rates, they were not going to invest. And of course, it includes not just foreigners, but also diaspora people who want to invest in the country.
So is this an indication that perhaps this administration knows what it's doing? Is that also an indication that something positive might begin to come, let me say, in the mid to long term?
Well, I think it's going to come faster than that. I mean, I think this administration has shown it's going to move quickly on big issues. Again, the foil subsidy, like the FX regime, was something that had been talked about for years. I mean, a decade ago, the foil subsidy was almost removed. I mean, here the President, His Excellency, the President, removed it on his first day, his first speech. Literally within 10 minutes of being in office, he removed what was a major impediment to progress in the country. So it shows you how bold it is. And you've seen some other things coming out, I think, that are very encouraging. So one of the things that we've said is there needs to be a major streamlining of the MDAs and the cost of governance, and not just the cost, but the complexity of governance. So you have companies dealing with multiple regulators, 5, 6, 8 regulators. It's not a situation that's going to be conducive for success. And they've already come out and said, actually, we're looking at merging some of the MDAs. So that's another very positive sign there on that. So overall, we're very encouraged. I think the international community is certainly encouraged, but even business people in Nigeria are very encouraged in these early days.
Business people, what cadre of business people? Because Nigeria is a country that has so many MSMEs, about 39 million. Now, it fell from about 41.6 million to about 39 million businesses. And MSMEs are the greatest employer of labor in Nigeria. In fact, I would say nano businesses, nano, small, nano, micro, small, medium enterprises before we even move into the big businesses, because we know that Nigeria is not a country of so many big businesses. So what category of businesses do you say are encouraged by this? Because those categories of businesses, the MSMEs, are inundated right now with high fuel costs, high production costs, and all of that.
Well, I can't speak for all businesses, but yeah, I mean, I think people know that I'm very connected to young people in Nigeria. So people come every week and talk to me about their businesses. So these are small businesses or maybe medium-sized businesses. Since His Excellency was inaugurated, I've probably had 3 or 4 people come to my home and tell me about their business. They've all been universally positive on that. But for the informal sector, I mean, one of the greatest challenges for them, of course, is they're really highly taxed. And these informal taxes by non-state actors, I mean, that's an area that I think is very important for the government to take on, but particularly that's often a state issue. A number of governors have taken this on as a state issue. I think Ado has taken it on. I think a number has taken it on, for example. But that, from their sector, what would make more difference, I mean, the foil subsidy may have benefited them slightly, but what would really benefit the informal sector is the removal of all these extra costs. I mean, the KK drivers pay daily to drive the KK, maybe multiple times daily. The people in the markets pay daily to be there. The person setting up a stall to sell pays a fee on that. And a lot of these fees are non-state fees, or there's no receipt, it's not clear where the proceeds are going. So if you really wanted to help the informal sector, where there's a huge amount of business, over 50% of our economy, the efforts to regularize the payments they make, reduce those payments. I mean, if you manage to eliminate some of those payments they were making to non-state actors, that would far outweigh anything they lost from the removal of the foil subsidy.
Now, let's talk about the latest guidance from the Central Bank of Nigeria. I did read it earlier on that the Central Bank at the weekend put out a press statement announcing it has lifted FX restrictions, so people can actually even freely put in their dollars right now in their dome accounts and also withdraw. What do you think that will do? Do you see that addressing the supply of FX? Because I was one of those that also asked that question. I think it was last Friday or Thursday, I can't remember which day now, when June 14th, so I think the next day, June 15th, when I had a guest and I asked him when the central bank brought out that circular of removal of the RT200 and the Naira for dollars scheme, and now floating the Naira. I was one of those that asked that day, where is the supply going to come from? Because what it means now is that the CBN is, not going to be managing the FX markets anymore to an extent. Do you think this addresses that concern? That people will now begin to bring out the dollars they are hoarding, especially big men, and putting in the banks?
I mean, the big men don't have enough dollars to make. I mean, there's $50 and $60 billion worth
Doctor, you think so? That the big men in Nigeria don't have dollars?
They don't have the scale of dollars to move the market. The market is bigger than any of the big men. I mean, we have $50 to $60 billion of imports. We have $50 to $60 billion of exports a year. These are large amounts. I mean, the people who really have the economic power for FX, of course, are the diaspora. But let's be very clear what was going on, because I think the way the FX system evolved in Nigeria was really something that created huge problems on it. Because if you think about the structure of it, the way we always thought about it was NMPC produced dollars. Those dollars were transferred to the Federation account. The CBN took the Federation account money and sold it to actors. We don't know the actors at the official rate, 411, 415 on that. And there's a few problems with this system. I mean, to begin with, first off, actually, the first problem, of course, is there's nothing from the Federation account, nothing coming into the Federation account. Because of the foil subsidy, all of the money that might have come into the Federation account because of the foil subsidy, the reduction in production didn't come in. And the NMPC says it was paying 400 billion Naira a month on the foil subsidy. And of course, so then it didn't remit anything. There was nothing remitted to the Federation account in 2022 and all of 2023. 3 years,
yes.
And of course, then what happens is pensioners are not getting paid in Sokoto. Teachers are not getting paid in Enugu. State employees are not getting paid in Cross River. And that was the effect of this foil subsidy and the system there. So you think about this for a minute. When we did have dollars flow, the dollars would flow to the CBN. The CBN would sell them to opaque actors, privileged actors at 411. They would then give the governor of Sokoto a smaller amount of Naira than the market might have been. Maybe the market price is 600, 650. And then the Sokoto governor can't pay pensions on that. So the pensioner in Sokoto is not receiving a pension because some privileged actor is receiving dollars at 411. That system doesn't make any sense. And one reason it doesn't make any sense is this country seems to have the idea that the dollars belong to the CBN. But of course, the dollars don't belong to the CBN. They may be housed in the CBN. The dollars belong under the federal system, 56% to the federal government, 26% to the, 56% to the federal government, 24% to the state, and 20% to the LGAs. So effectively, the CBN is now taking the dollars that belong to the LGAs and the states and the federal government, giving them to privileged actors at 411, and then giving them a short change, changing them on the Naira. The equivalent would be let's say that your relatives do well in the United States. They send you $1,000 to your domiciliary account here, and you're really happy because they've done well, and they're starting to, you help pay for your nephew's education. Now he's doing well in the United States. You're getting some return on that. And then you go down to your bank, I won't name any bank here, and you say, I'd like my $1,000 because I'm going to go, of course, the market price for $1,000 is 750,000 Naira. And the bank says to you, no, we only have 411,000 Naira for you because what we did was we sold your $1,000 to someone else at a privileged rate, and now here's your 411,000. You would likely be pretty angry about that, right?
Well, I'm actually angry.
Right. Well, that's the governors and the LGA should be angry because it's their money that was sold at that low rate to privileged actors, in many cases opaque actors. So that whole system of thinking that the CBN owns the dollars is incorrect. The dollars are owned by individuals who export, and there's lots of exporters in Nigeria. What people don't realize, of course, is we have hundreds of thousands of people exporting brain power, working remotely. They're working for Amazon, they're working for Microsoft, they're working for many, many companies. I ran into a young man from Canada who works for a Canadian telecoms company. They have dollars. And of course, if we actually made the system, if we wanted the system to work, in fact, in the Federation account, when it receives dollars, if it ever receives dollars again from the NMPC, should be transferred to the governors, to the states, and transferred to the federal government in dollars. They can decide when and when they sell their dollars. So for that viewpoint, there's been a fundamental misunderstanding of the way the system should work. And this architecture has made people very confused, thinking it's the CBN that controls the dollars, that the CBN's dollars. But of course, it's not the CBN's dollars. They're just the central bank.
The warehouse. So what does that also tell us right now? Because we've seen the reforms coming in from this administration. Where does that leave the productive base and the manufacturing base, especially with the central bank lifting FX restrictions right now? That if you have $10,000, you can actually withdraw up to $10,000 from your bank. If you even have more than that, you can deposit now. Where does it leave the central bank in terms of course, the CBN will not manufacture dollars because that's not even our currency. Where does it leave them as the apex bank? Because I also asked that question last week. Do you think that also addresses the supply of dollars, bearing in mind that companies are also going to begin to adjust, and individuals too would also begin to adjust?
Yeah, I mean, that's the remarkable thing about economics. I mean, I'm not really happy being an economist, but sometimes economic forces work on that. So what can we need to export things from this country. And what's really damaged our balance of payments and the currency in the last few years is actually the collapse in oil production. In fact, we had the worst of all possible worlds because we had the invasion of Ukraine, so we had high oil prices and low production of oil subsidy. And that was a disaster for the country, and that's one of the reasons we have such a wide spread between the official rate or the old official rate and the parallel rate. But what can we export? Well, we can export hydrocarbons, and it's we've said very clearly, and the government has come out and said it in fact too, that actually almost their #1 priority is get the hydrocarbon production back up. I mean, it fell as low as 1.0. So you think about, to allow it to go, I mean, 2014, 2015, it was about 1.7 million barrels a day. It was as high as over 2 million barrels a day when I arrived in the country. And we allowed it to drop to 1.0. We had a foil subsidy for over 600,000 barrels a day. It's not a big surprise that we have a financial crisis in that circumstance. So #1 policy to improve our balance of payments is hydrocarbon production, right? And the government's already come out and said that. The #2 thing, what else can we export? Well, there's certain agricultural products that we can export. Sesame being one. Japan is a big importer of our sesame. I was with the Japanese ambassador the other day, very happy about that supply chain. I heard about actually Sokoto exports garlic overland from Sokoto up to Morocco as an example, and there's a few other crops like that, cocoa, cassava, rubber, for example, and we really should continue the emphasis on being able to produce some export crops on that. what's the third thing we can export? Well, the third thing we can export is brains. And
I know you were going to come to that.
Right, of course.
Because
Well,
you so much love.
Well,
Anytime I speak to you, you're always talking
well,
about
isn't it great to have a
capacity
country where
development.
the biggest export is brains? I mean, we've got people like the World Bank coming out and say we're a low complexity environment. In fact, that's completely wrong. We're a high complexity environment because our biggest export's the most complex thing in the universe. And of course, we wrote the paper originally talking about the diaspora and exporting brains to the diaspora, but it's not ideal. But because of technology and the way we work today, and of course COVID accelerated it, we can now export brains while the people remain in Nigeria. And this is something that the entire nation is getting behind. I mean, His Excellency President Tinubu in his first speech came out and said 1 million jobs in the ICT sector a year, even more ambitious than what we said, a lot of them exporting. As I said, there are lots of individuals in this country already earning foreign exchange for the country as individuals. There's organized companies. Of course, the most successful is Amal Hassan's company, Outsource Global, based here in Abuja. She's got 1,500 people, and they have software developers, call centers, BPO, legal services, accounting services. So that's the third area for export. But I would say the other thing, of course, is import substitution. So stop importing some things. And actually, the number one thing we put on that list is often neglected, which is we import too much education. So what I mean by that is...
We import too much education?
Yeah, so an import of education is when someone goes abroad to get educated. So if you go to Britain, for Britain that's an export. So you pay, and for us it's an import. And we're spending, and of course these numbers are not captured very easily for a few reasons. But I think some of the estimates, and we would agree with, is that we probably import about $3 billion worth of education. So the number one area where we could reduce the cost of the, in addition to PMS and being able to refine petroleum, the second area where we really should reduce imports is education. So if we have an improved education system, some of the money that comes out of the FOIL subsidy reinvest in education, but we also have private providers. We have a new online university coming up run by ULesson here in Abuja. We have Nexford University. We've of course got Babcock, Coventry, places like that have done very well. So that's a third area where we can export. So I think that, and of course people are going to adjust. I mean, if the Naira did go to 800 to the dollar or 900 to the dollar, less people would be able to send their kids abroad. They'd look at these local alternatives, and the demand and supply of dollars will equilibrate. So I think those are some of the areas we need to look for to improve our balance of payment. But as I said, the government, the new administration has come out very clearly. They're focused on exactly those areas: hydrocarbons, agriculture, brain exports, while people remain in Nigeria.
Do you have confidence? Does the organization have confidence that as these bold reforms are being undertaken now, that the government will utilize those funds to the benefit of the people? Because what we've also seen is the deficit of trust. Perhaps one of these days I should discuss the economics of trust on the show. The deficit of trust. The government have told the Nigerian people, you've got to make sacrifices, but we haven't seen sacrifices from this administration, even in 3 weeks, but it's been quick to roll out bold reforms, whether it was inadvertently or with intention, and Nigerians are suffering for it now. Do you see the government doing what it's supposed to do with the monies that would be saved from fuel subsidy removal and some other reforms? If you're not seeing that, what are you recommending to government to alleviate the burden on Nigerians?
I think, Nancy, it's a really critical area. I mean, if we go back in the last decade, the government has, the resources the government's got, they haven't used very well. So we have Ajaokuta Steel, which has absorbed billions and produces no steel. We have the 3 refineries, which absorb billions and produce no refined product. We have the new terminal built at Lagos, $500 million borrowed from the Chinese, which I don't think the international airlines used because it wasn't constructed properly. We have, I think it was $465 million spent on the CCTV program here in Abuja. Borrowed again, I think from the Chinese.
Yes.
I have never seen a CCTV camera out there. I don't know where the money has gone. So the government has, and the Kaduna-Abuja Railroad, so maybe a good idea in a different security environment. But railroads are passenger rails, a soft target, and our security environment is now giving no value, I think about $750 million. So we've had this massive investment or not investment, we've had this massive waste in projects there. And of course, then we just have the governance issue, the cost of NAS, the multiplicity of MDAs on that. So one of the things that we have said is the government needs to show people it can use its resources wisely. I mean, there's some actors out there, particularly the international agencies that have come along and say, you know, Nigeria only collects 6% in tax revenue. The solution in Nigeria is to collect more in tax revenue. We are fundamentally opposed to that. We think that, like you're saying, in fact, what the government at the federal level needs to do is show it can use resources wisely. Instead of trying to increase taxes, adding taxes, increasing the excise tax rate, it needs to give some signal that it's actually able to use resources better. Otherwise, I think what you said is exactly what's going to happen, which is there's going to be a credibility gap. So I'm hoping, and we've been very public about this the last number of months, the need for the government to show that it can use resources wisely. It's moving in that direction. So let's see if that happens. But as you say, come out very quickly on something that causes some short-term pain, the foil subsidy, the FX for some people. You know, they also need to do their part on showing that they can use resources. Well, simply stop wasting the resources that the nation has. And as I said, from our viewpoint, it's absurd to talk about more revenue mobilization until why would you mobilize more revenue if the federal government hasn't shown it can use resources widely? That is just a recipe for real problems in the nation. So let's hope they can put some signals out quickly to say, actually, we're going to do a better job of using the nation's resources than you've seen in the past. Let us go for a while after that. Then maybe we could talk about raising taxes if appropriate, but there's no reason now to talk about raising taxes or revenue mobilization until the government can demonstrate it can use resources more wisely.
So that's where the economics of trust really comes in, especially at a time when Nigeria needs economic growth and development, because I know that there's even a growing evidence that trust promotes economic growth, and Nigerians need trust at this time, especially from the government. So in as much as President Tinubu's administration is telling Nigerians, roll up your sleeves and your agbada, we are also seeing that from his administration. And we also know that the administration will meet with labor today. At least that was the last information we got from the last meeting that the Chief of Staff, the former Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila, did say. So let's hope to see what would happen from there. That perhaps government has really thought about labor's demands and what it will churn out, especially with the $800 million loan from the World Bank. So much to really say. But let's move over to the other part of it, which is the parallel market. What do you think would happen to the parallel market? And now that's one. Do you see that convergence in terms of what we have now, as it were, the I&E window rate and the parallel market? Or do you see a death of the parallel market? That is one. The depreciation of the Naira, or some also would say is an appreciation, but some people don't understand it. They will be like, oh no, the Naira has depreciated in the last 2 weeks, okay, no, in the last few days, since the central bank announced that, because people will say, oh, the Naira has really been trading at a parallel market rate. So now we're seeing the Naira at about 600 and something is an appreciation. What would you say, especially for businesses right now? Just, was it yesterday that I read that Aliko Dangote, who used to be Africa's richest man, is now the second richest man in Africa. So Dangote has been overtaken by a Southern African, a South African, I think Joan Rupert. Yes, and that is directly linked to this. So you can imagine how many rich men in Nigeria and rich women have their wealth and their riches have been a bit depleted.
But it's a fiction. I mean, I guess.
Doctor, did you just say, what did you say?
It's a fiction.
It's
I mean,
a fiction.
It depends. Well, it depends whether you're one of the privileged actors. But let's say you've got 100 million Naira. You know, your worth in U.S. dollars depends on whether it's 411 or 750. If you're a privileged actor who can change that 100 million Naira into dollars at 411, you know, that's fantastic. But if you're the average person who doesn't have that access and it's 100 million Naira at 750, you know, you're worth less. It's just, that's the mathematics of it. And I have no doubt if the economy does better. I mean, Mr. Dangote is in all of the basic materials, cement,
so if you have
food,
more dollars, you change it to Naira, is worth less. Yeah, if you have more dollars, you change it to Naira. Doctor, explain what you mean.
I'm just saying, if I have 100 million, I don't have 100 million Naira, but but I'm paid in Naira, I have a few Naira. So if I have 100 million Naira, you know, and that's a big man in Nigeria, or a billion Naira, let's say a billion Naira, so that's really a big man, a Naira billionaire. You know, what's your net worth in US dollars? How would Forbes, you know, rank you? Well, it depends whether you have access at the parallel rate or not. If you have access at the parallel rate, and you can change it at 411, you're worth, what, $2.5 million. If you change it at the rate that the average person get, you're worth $1.3 million. So that's the difference. It depends what you have access to on that. So in a way, it was a fiction. So people would pretend our rate was 411, but when you went to the bank to get 411, you're not getting 411. I mean. And of course,
but for Dangote, he was
well, but that
calculated with about the official rate earlier.
Exactly. So
and that was perhaps he was the richest. But now that the Naira is about 6.
Right, so it's not a big surprise.
So
but as I said, I think his net worth will come back. He's in every basic industry in this country, and of course across Africa. I'm sure if the economy does better here, the biggest beneficiary will be, well, the Nigerian people will be the biggest beneficiary, but Mr. Dangote will also benefit from that, on that.
Okay, let's talk about these reforms that we've seen in the last couple of days. Do you see, how do we handle the pressure of what I call reforms overdose? Because we've seen previous administrations, at least from 2012, President Jonathan, even President Yaradua, fuel price was increased, I think, during Obasanjo. He came, he reduced it. President Jonathan took off the subsidy in January 2012. Some people in the last administration, and even this administration, campaigned against Jonathan at that time to take it off, that it was a scam. President Buhari didn't have the temerity to remove fuel subsidy. President Tinubu now did it on the first day, like I said earlier on, whether it was inadvertently or it was deliberate, is being removed right now. Do you see a pressure of reforms overdose? Because it seems electricity, fuel subsidy, and, you know, a whole lot hitting us at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
Without a calculated way of how the pressure will be eased on Nigerians.
Yeah, I think what we have said is that, you know, there's been the expectation for the federal government to do too much. And I've been involved in the ERGP, NDP. These programs are too complex, right? I mean, anyone who's worked in an organization and had practical experiences, whether it's the government or the private sector, understands an organization can only do a few things on that. So what we've said is the government should focus on the fundamentals, focus on a few things, but also focus on simplifying their role. And there are things that the government should actually stop doing. So if you take the foil situation, the fuel situation, I mean, once we have Dangote importing, if we still need to import because the refinery is not quite on stream, once Dangote starts to import, Mr. Dangote's company, once other importers come in, NNPC goes below 30%, the price is set by the market forces. The federal government doesn't really have any role. They have a minor regulatory role, but the system takes care of itself. They don't have to get up in the morning and worry, are there fuel queues, are there not, what's the price there, because that system takes care of itself. Electricity, I think it was a major step forward to put it on the concurrent list, and I suspect you're going to see even more emphasis to say, states, look, you take on the electricity. We've said for years that it should be a state matter. I mean, it's a provincial matter in Canada, it's a state matter in the United States, it's a state matter in India. It's perfect, you're perfectly capable, if you want electricity in your state, to figure out the right technology, the right way to approach it, and connect up the grids on that. And that would really be a simplification, because the federal government would not need to manage it. And in fact, they've come out and said, you know, NERC will continue to regulate states that don't have a state regulatory body for electricity, but once a state starts to regulate electricity, you know, they're going to step back. So those types of things where they step back from things that make life simpler, and of course that also reduces the cost of governance. What's not going to work is to create more programs, more MDAs, more costs, more complexity, because every time you create a new MDA, they then need to work side by side with all the other MDAs in that sector and the regulatory situation. So we would like to see a simplification, not a complexification of the way governance works. So you're exactly right. It could be, if they started to add in programs, then that's going to be overload, and it's ultimately going to be unsuccessful.
The way it is now, do you think it's an overdose? I don't know if I got clarity from what you said.
I think
Is it an
the foil
overdose?
subsidy and the unification were absolutely necessary. I think those, to be honest, people talk a lot about them, but those were the easy steps. It was simply a decision, and now those sectors can take care of themselves. The FX sector working in the normal way. I mean, the way FX should work is if you want to change Naira to dollars or dollars to Naira, you go to your bank and they give you the price.
Yeah.
No one's sending a Form A or Form B or Form X to the CBN. I mean, that is system, if you think about it, 200 million people, there's probably at least 10 million people here who are receiving remittances. You talked about all the MSEs. I mean, there's probably tens of thousands of importers, and they're filing forms with the Central Bank of Nigeria. That system does not work. The only system that works is you have a need, or you want to change one way or another. You go to your bank and you change at a market-determined price. And once that happens, it simplifies things. But I think those two decisions were relatively easy because they were single-shot decisions. Now becomes the complex part because, for example, if you start to merge agencies, so they've announced, for example, they want to merge the customs, FIRS,
FIRS
and it probably makes
NIMASA?
and NIMASA.
Yeah.
Probably makes sense because you now have an integrated view of tax collection and what you're trying to collect and the revenue on that. But of course, it now means instead of being 3 DGs, there's going to be 1 DG. Instead of being this many board members, there's only going to be a third of that. So there are going to be losers in that. We'll see if they have the courage to take that step forward. But I think that would be a major litmus test for the government if they're prepared to take on this simplification and really implement what the Orange-Shea report said in 2013. Of course, updated for 2023, but the basic philosophy Orange-Shea report, which is simplify the MDAs. Because, I mean, if we go back historically, the MDA system was not created to make Nigeria work. It was created as a system of patronage. Right, so you create another MDA. Why create an agency? Many countries, it would simply be a department of the minister, and it's more direct control. But everyone wants to run an agency because when you run an agency, you have an independent board. You get to call yourself DG. You have your own money that comes in because you're charging fees to the industry, et cetera. So telecoms, I mean, they pay about 40 different fees to various agencies and state governments and the federal government. So everyone wants their own agency. And of course, if you lose your agency, that's a loss to the individual and to the board members in there. So we'll see if they have the courage to start to do that. But as you said earlier, if they want to build trust with the Nigerian people, they've got to say, yeah, we're prepared to take 3 DGs and make them 1. We're prepared to take this agency and the functions that are not adding value to Nigeria, we take away. The rest of the functions we fold up back into the ministry. So we'll see in the next few months if they're prepared to do that.
Yeah, we'll actually see that. Does this, what we've just seen in the last few weeks, where does it leave the NNPC? Do you think with the removal of subsidy and with the PIA Act that we have, that the NNPC Limited will begin to play as it is? Or do you think that the NNPC Limited also needs reforms on its own, despite that we have new wine in old bottle? You know what I mean with what happened last year. That is one. I'm looking at our time. We have about 3 minutes to the end. Where do you see inflation going to? Because 22.4% was released by the NBS just a few days ago. That did not have the component of the fuel subsidy. What do you see for June and for July? Because the pressure of fuel subsidy removal will definitely impact food. I think all the headlines in inflation, really. What do you think?
Well, I think what we've been saying is what's causing inflation. So there's 3 things causing inflation. One is the reduction in oil production, right? Because that's created the balance of payments crisis that's driven the Naira to 750. So if we can get oil production back up, we're going to reduce inflation, maybe even bring it down pretty rapidly. The second thing driving inflation is insecurity in the agricultural space. So when farmers are insecure, they don't plant as much, they can't get it to the market, so you have the same amount of Naira chasing less food stuff, and we have food inflation. And I think people would, everyone I talk to says food inflation is not 22%. Food inflation is double, triple. Yeah. I mean, it's much, much more. So it's really harmful to the bottom of the pyramid. So and the third thing was, of course, the big government deficits. So if those 3 issues can be taken care of, focusing on those fundamentals will really help inflation. So, I'm optimistic. I mean, the government's come out very clearly and said insecurity is the #1 thing on their agenda. They've said getting the oil production up is the #2 thing on their agenda. And they've already taken out the foil subsidy. So they're working on all 3 of the components that really have driven inflation. So I think we could see maybe a blip, statistical blip, July, August. But if these policies work, we're going to see inflation come down quite a lot. And in our 1 minute remaining, NMPC, I mean, the government has come out and said they're going to list NMPC. Now, why is this such a, maybe as a whole, maybe individual parts, NLG? I'm a little unclear whether minority, majority. I personally would think at the beginning you do it a minority and see how it goes. But this has a lot of fantastic implications for Nigeria. One, transparency goes up. If you're listed on the stock exchange, you have audited accounts, you have all the rules of the stock exchange. I mean, the NGX is a very professional stock exchange, very stringent rules on that. People can invest in it, so they now can take some of their PFA money and invest in it. And it then means that now it has to go through governance processes. You can't, the Minister of Petroleum can't tell a company that has external shareholders, you know, what to do. So that would be a major step forward. But it would also do what I said a little bit earlier, was to simplify things, because if you actually list parts of the NMPC, then the government doesn't have to spend so much time thinking about the oil sector, because it's self-governing at that point on that. So a lot of cause for optimism. I continue to be very optimistic about I'm more optimistic about the future of Nigeria than I was in 2022.
In 2022. You need not say more. But just before we close, 30 seconds, where do you see the Naira with all these adjustments, unification, flexibility, devaluation? Because there are many definitions out there, but whatever it is, the Naira is floating right now. Where do you see the value of the Naira in the mid to long term? Are we going to be hanging around that 600?
Let's say 3 to 6 months.
Yes.
I mean, I think Bismarck came out with the right number. He said it's going to 600, right? And I don't like predictions that, you know, things can go wrong. But sitting here today, I don't think that's a bad number. I also think it fits with what the Tinubu administration, His Excellency the President's administration, has set as the target, which I think is 550 to 600. Okay. I mean, just given the fundamentals, given people's change in behavior, it seems like a reasonable number once the market settles down over the next 2 or 3 months.
Okay. I think we'll leave it at that point. Thank you very much for coming on today's edition of the show. All right, I've been speaking with Dr. Andrew Nevin. He's the Chief Economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we've been talking about the Naira floats as well as economic developments, what we hope to see in the next few months to 1 year. But I must say that Nigerians are keeping their fingers crossed, and we're waiting for the President's cabinet and waiting to see what sacrifices the government will take. Nigerians have gotten a hit now. Food prices are up, transportation costs are up. If you go around Abuja, I don't know for those of us that stay around Abuja, at least I've noticed in the last 2 weeks since the President actually was sworn in, we've not seen so many cars on the road. So what are your plans concerning transportation and other implications of these policies? I think I'll leave it at that today on the show. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji. Bye for now.